Hey everybody, Dylan Bowman here, one of the founders of Freetrail and the host of the Freetrail podcast. Thank you for watching our video podcast. A couple of things before we get started. Number one, please do join Freetrail Pro, our great community for trail runners from around the world. There's a lot of great perks involved in that membership, and we would love to have you on board. Number two, a big thank you to our sponsors here in the video podcast. We don't do real commercial breaks, so I just want to give them a major shout out on the front end here. We have some discount codes in the show notes that you can take advantage of. Number one, Speedland, of course, the makers of the GS Tam, the shoe that bears the Freetrail logo on it, and a product that we worked on to bring to market in the spring of 2023. Our other annual partner is Gnarly Nutrition, makers of fantastic training and racing nutritional supplements that will really help you on your trail journey. We always have a third partner on the show that rotates throughout the year. So depending on who it is now, you can find a link and a discount code in the show notes for that partner as well. But a big thank you to the sponsors who do make our podcast possible. Number three, last but not least, we would really appreciate it while you're here to smash the subscribe button on the Freetrail YouTube channel. You can also click the bell icon to get notifications whenever we post new content. We are working very hard to keep you inspired, informed, and entertained here in the great sport of trail running. Thank you so much. Enjoy the show. Greg Thornley, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
Thanks, Dylan. Great to be here.
We were just lamenting our mutual fatigue after Western States Memorial Day training camp. How are you feeling after what is a dress rehearsal for race day itself?
Yeah, it's actually probably a little bit harder in some respects because I gotta get prepared to do a talk before each run, and we have to account for every runner each day instead of just one event. So you have these really, uplifting moments when everybody's in at the end of the day, like, oh yeah, we're done. And then we got to just ramp back up, and then we come down and ramp back up. So in some ways it's even more fatiguing than the race day. Cause when the race is over, it's over, right? We just crash and sleep and mentally relax. But
what's the history with the Memorial Day training camp? Cause I think a lot of people don't really appreciate the production that it is. It almost is like a 3-day running event. There's aid stations, there's volunteers, there's food at the finish line, there's massage tents. So it's almost like a real race experience. I'd love to know sort of more of the history of Memorial Day camp and how it's evolved.
Yeah, it's been going. I think it's one of the best deals in ultra running. I just had a conversation with the Palettis when they were here for the canyons, and they were asking about how many people show up, and they couldn't believe it was $55 for Saturday and $50 for Sunday and Monday. And they're like, you could charge a whole lot more. It's like, well, we don't care. We want to keep it low key. We want to create this atmosphere where people just have a chance to see the trail and maybe be exposed for the first time if they're in the race or not. If they're in the race, they could be a little bit scared after Saturday, both the snow and then the ups and the downhills. But it used to be, I think it's been going on at least since the 80s. It used to be a camp. When Norm Klein was conducting, they camped up at the Sawmill site, which is the top of Bath Road. And there would be meals and evening activities. And then that changed probably 15 years ago or so before I got here. And it's something that we've thought about going back to camping, but there's so many lodging opportunities and food opportunities that if you're training hard, it's probably better that you get a good night's sleep, or at least you're in a bed. And but yeah, we're pretty relaxed on the cutoffs. We don't know exactly when we start. We ask that people try to maintain an 18-minute pace, which is 30-hour 100-mile pace. But we were way behind that on Saturday. We were 45 minutes later than that at Deadwood, and then over an hour at Michigan Bluff. And, we're not trying to be like the race where, okay, at 2:15, you're cut, you're out. Give me your wristband. Just have a good time and have a lot of.
It was so fun. I mean, having had a million conversations over the weekend, I think what you said is perfectly accurate, and that it's an event for really anybody. You don't have to be on the entrance list for Western States. It's the perfect way to come experience the trail in a supported capacity with a great community element, with so many hundreds of people there of all different skills and abilities and experience levels. And yeah, I had the good fortune of running at tempo pace with some of the elite women that are going to be in the race this year. And then also sort of like on the bus, catching up with folks who aren't even in the event, but who carved out a weekend to just come and run on the Western States Trail. It's a really special thing. And I think while we're talking about history, this is your 10th year as race director, right? This will be the 10th race.
11th.
So I know were sort of apprenticed in 2012. And I thought it would be fun to have you speak a little bit about your predecessor, Greg Soderlund, the race director before you, because I know he in some ways encouraged you to apply for the job. And I didn't know Greg personally myself, but from what I understand, he was a very well-respected race director. So I'd love for you to just maybe tell the story of your guys' relationship and how he encouraged you to apply for the job.
Yeah. So it was 2011, right before the race. I think it was it was Friday night before the race. I knew that he was retiring. They hadn't advertised, the board hadn't advertised for the job yet, but we knew it was happening. And there was a race director here in town who took over a couple of his other events that he owned. He didn't own Western States, so he didn't get to make the decision on who was going to succeed him at Western States. But he says on Friday night to me, he goes, "Craig, it's not decided yet who's going to be the next race director." Like, oh my gosh. I knew exactly what he meant. Oh. And I didn't sleep that night. And the whole next day I was scared. Like, man, can I actually do this? This is so much bigger than Waldo, which I had directed for 10 years or so before that. I wish I could blame my 2011 race on that, but it definitely planted the seed, because I really wasn't planning on being a race director. I thought maybe I'd end up on the board at that point, because I was a big fan of the race. And I wrote a blog, Conduct the Juices, that spoke directly to the board of directors many times. And, it was all Western States centric. So,
dude, I remember that. And maybe we'll come back around to talking about the blogs, because Conduct the Juices was appointment reading for me when I was coming up in the sport. And there was many other blogs were similarly influential in the sport and with me personally.
Yeah, and the blog was great because it had some really serious stuff where I spoke directly to the board, and then it had a lot of banter, mostly between AJW and myself, back and forth. But yeah, Greg, wow. I spent that whole race just trying to wrap my head around, could I do this job? And he told me after I got hired, he said he really felt it when he took the job, how he felt the responsibility that this race meant so much to so many people, not just the runners, but the 1,500 volunteers each year, probably many, many thousands of volunteers over the years. And he didn't want to screw it up. I don't usually go into things thinking that I don't want to mess up. I usually just think about going forward and making things better. And but yeah, he handled a lot of details. He and I had very different management styles. He had a really flat organization. So he had lots of people reporting to him, where I just can't handle that many people reporting to me. So we delegated things out. We changed things a bit.
Yeah.
I don't know how he answered all the people that.
Well, the race has also grown exponentially.
It has. Yeah. In fairness to me, it has.
It did the same for him, for sure, too. I think, but it was sort of an interesting moment when he did hand off the reins to you. And again, I didn't know Greg personally, but I know that he was well regarded in the community, and that I'm sure you probably felt that there was big shoes to fill, which I think everybody agrees. You've been able to do so admirably, but maybe going a little deeper on that, just sort of like to what extent you balancing like, being respectful to the legacy of the event and your predecessor versus ushering the race into a new generation. How do you think about that?
Well, Greg actually, I think, and I didn't want this to happen, but I think he viewed any changes that I wanted to make as an indictment on the way he did things. And that was not at all my intent. I hope whoever takes over after me looks at all the things in the race that could be improved and improves on those things, because there's you can still grow. The race can grow. But yeah, I think he took a lot of the stuff that I did, anything I wanted to change. He's like, don't do that, Greg. Like, well, Greg, I want to make this race go forward. I've been thinking about this now for a while, and I have a list of things that I think are low hanging fruit, and I'm gonna pick that fruit. But he didn't go out obviously the way he wanted. He had kidney cancer, and he didn't last as long as he had hoped. So we made the transition a little bit earlier than he originally planned. But I think he went out feeling good about where the race was, and it was in my hands. Somebody was going to take it maybe in a little bit different direction, but I think he felt okay that it's not suddenly just going to go off the cliff and become an obscure, irrelevant race on the world scene.
Yeah. Well, whatever happens, Greg passed in 2016, but whatever happens in the afterlife, I'm sure he's proud of the way you've directed the race. But thanks for entertaining me on that, because I've always been curious as to, how that transition went for you, and just like the enormity of that responsibility and kind of stepping into the race director role for a race like Western States, which is, of course, a massive undertaking, not only from a logistical standpoint, but also probably a burden that you have to wear sometimes, and wanting to be respectful to the legacy, but then also knowing that there's improvements that can be made. And I'm sure we'll come back around and talk more about some of the things that you have done in the last decade that you have been at the helm. But maybe going further back in time, just to set the context for the audience. I know you've told this story before, but I'm sure people would find it entertaining who haven't heard you tell the story of you and your brother Chris and how you discovered Western States when you guys were kids.
Yeah, so we grew up primarily in the Bay Area. We moved around a lot. My dad was in the Air Force. We moved around a lot, but primarily in the Bay Area. And my parents split up, and my stepdad and mom decided, hey, let's move to cool California. Like, where in the hell is cool California? We were not necessarily city people, but we were not rural. We didn't grow up in a rural place. And so it was a pretty abrupt change moving to Auburn Lake Trails, where the 85-mile aid station is now. But we totally fell in love with being able to go outside in our backyard. We had this big river, big canyon. So we were in the canyon all the time. And I know today parents would not let their kids do what we did. We got to go down there. We were camping there in July of, I think it was 78, or June or July of 78, right at Hoboken Canyon Creek, which is, if you're coming from the Green Gate, going in course direction, it's the creek that has a little bit of the concrete left over. We were sleeping right on the trail. Absolutely stupid place to camp. And a runner comes by and asks us where the aid station was. We had no idea what he was talking about. And then more came through, and we eventually realized that, oh my goodness, we're just a couple miles from the Auburn Lake Trails aid station. They had run 83 miles, and they were on their journey to Auburn. That's how we found out about the race.
What an unbelievable way to discover the event. And you must pinch yourself. You and Chris must laugh hysterically about that at least once a year, just seeing how much of an impact it's had on your personal life, and the fact that, you're now the race director and a 9-time finisher of this ridiculous event yourself.
Well, we both saw the look in their eyes. We hadn't experienced it. I was in 7th grade. My brother was younger than that. But we knew whatever in the heck they had experienced, that we wanted to experience the same thing. We wanted to know what they were going through. Yeah. And that stuck with both of us for all these years. Yeah, it was pretty impactful.
So adding further color there, I know you also had a tradition of volunteering at the Dusty Corners aid station, like through the 80s and 90s. So maybe provide any fun memories or anecdotes from that, or just generally like what the vibe of the race was like at that time.
Oh, it was as cohesive. The aid station crews were as cohesive as they are now. We would show up after not seeing anybody. We'd show up on race day with mostly the same people, the same core group of people, and it was like we had seen each other last weekend. It was pretty darn fun. My brother and I were the runners, so we got to deal with any runner type issues. Most of these people were not runners that were volunteering. That was really interesting to me that they weren't runners. Some of them were, but most of them were not runners. So we got to deal with any cramping issues or shoe issues. We got to deal with some serious stuff. When Donald Choi had got airlifted out, he was hyponatremic. I was asked to help him, and I didn't know what the hell was going on with him. And he ends up, having a seizure and getting airlifted out. So it was pretty serious stuff. Yeah. It wasn't all just, this is fun, helping people. But I got to see Ann Trayson and Tim Tweetmeyer, so I got to have all these idols come through, and it was really a fun time working at Dusty Corners.
It's so cool that you just have that connection with the event, and it's funny to hear you provide that characterization of the aid station crews, because I know there is a deep camaraderie and a lot of people who have served the race admirably for years and years who volunteered at the same aid stations, and they're sort of like these teams within the greater Western States volunteer army. And I know they take a lot of pride in that. And I think there's probably a lot of people who wouldn't, classify themselves as runners who pour so much effort into the race. It's one of the great things about it.
Two of our longest serving aid station captains right now, I think they're 38 and 37 years. They are not runners, and they have been captaining aid stations for almost 40 years.
Which aid stations are that? Can you give a shout out to those people?
Yeah. So LeGrand Scott and his wife, Diana, they're at Red Star. And then Gerald at El Dorado, Gerald Bretag at El Dorado Creek.
Amazing. Oh, cool.
Yeah, they're amazing. And they are not runners. And they tell me that every time I see them. Like, I'm not a runner, Craig. I know that. It's okay. You don't have to be a runner. You do a great job at your aid station.
Getting to the nuts and bolts of the race operation, you mentioned at the start of our conversation about the Palettes, and obviously they operate with a different model. And I don't think a lot of people understand that Western States operates as a nonprofit. So maybe if you could just provide any idea, like for the audience who's listening, just sort of like how that makes the Western States operation different, in particular for you as the race director.
Well, I'll relay one more anecdote. When Andrew Messick from Ironman was visiting the United States, and they were looking around by races, they had dinner. The Palettes were here, and a couple other Ironman folks. And it was during the pandemic, so we ate outside in November, December. It was really cold. We came in after dinner, and I show them a buckle. I show them a silver buckle. And Andrew asked me how much they cost. And I said, they're whatever they were at the time, $435 or something. And he says, and what's your entry fee? I said, $410. And he said, how does that work?
You're a terrible businessman.
Yeah, exactly.
He said, it's not me, it's the board.
It's like, well, we're not burdened with having to make a profit. It's not about making a profit. So we can do things like that.
Yeah.
As long as we can't go in the red. We wouldn't survive if we were in the red every year. But it does allow us to do things differently than we just hired administrative assistant Carrie Ming, who you met this weekend. And, I told her many times, we do things at Western States, like assigning the requested bib number, right? It seems like a pretty trivial thing to do, but it's not easy. It takes a long time. And if you were doing this for a business and you had another race next month and a race after that, there's no way you'd spend that time on that. But we can do that. We can do things that are special that you would not do if you were efficiently trying to run a business and make money. You just wouldn't do it. So,
it's funny. Yeah. I remember laughing with Timothy Olson about the year that he was issued bib number 420. I don't know if that was your doing or a request of his, but
no, it wasn't mine.
Yeah.
Some years it's 99 or 100 or 420 used to be. It's not the same most requested bib number every year.
Yeah. So back to the nonprofit thing.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense as to why it was set up that way? Because to me, it feels like an extraordinary act of foresight and vision that's allowed the race to operate with so much integrity and so much independence over the course of decades.
Well, it splintered from the Western States Trail Foundation, the nonprofit that puts on Tevis. So I think they were using that model, and that came from Wendell Roby, I guess. He predated us by 20 years, 25 years, I think. So they spun off from that. They used that as the model and kept it that way forever.
Does it feel to you like it's sort of a blessing to operate as a nonprofit versus doing things that would maximize revenues and bottom line? Because it does change the whole feel of the race.
Well, I have never been a for-profit race director, so I'm not sure if I can really compare. But sure. I have thought recently, the last few years, what do I do after this job? Or do I do anything? Do I just retire and be the trails guy? Just carry a chainsaw around all the time, which is attractive right now. And I don't know if I could go to I don't know if I could work for Ironman and really be worried about the bottom line all the time. I don't know how I do personally on that, but it definitely allows us to maintain our independence. When people were pontificating that, Western States is going to be bought up by Ironman and UTMB. No, we're not for sale. It's never going to happen. We're in a position that is not an option. That's just not going to happen.
Yep.
So I think I wouldn't want it to be any other way. I'm not sure if Western States was a for-profit that I'd be the race director.
Maybe you could provide a little color as to how the structure of the organization operates, because, obviously you report to the board of trustees, and I know that's been a cohort of individuals over the course of those decades that have helped to steer the race forward. So maybe talk as the race director, how you interface with the board and how they sort of are supportive of your work.
Well, this has evolved quite a bit in the 11 years that I've been here. The board used to be involved in a lot of the operations type of decisions. And I think that really limited what the race director can do, and it made it pretty frustrating for him. And I think it was hard on the board too. But with Diana Fitzpatrick, our president, she has really been clear on, this is an operations issue. This is totally Craig. He doesn't need to get the board to approve this type of problem. And it allows me to I'm unencumbered with board discussions, which, as you know, can go pretty long at times now on pretty simple things, or not simple things, but things that you can't spend all your time. You can't spend an hour and a half talking about some of these issues that could be decided by me. But the board is very active, as you pointed out. the different board members over the years that had it's probably similar to life in general, business in general. There's a few people that do a hell of a lot of the work. Mm. And that's probably been the case since the very beginning of Western States. It's a few people that really do all the work. But I am still the sole employee. We have 5 managers now, including the administrative assistant that we just hired. None of them make enough money to live on. They have to have either retired from their real jobs or they have enough income from and enough flexibility in their current job that they can do this. And then the vast majority of folks are just volunteers. And I get unbelievably qualified people who are working with us, Ted Knutson, Joe Steinmetz, and Matt Keys. Like, these are brilliant people that really, if I had to pay them, I wouldn't be able to do it. So pretty darn cool that there are that many volunteers, that are that many people that really want to work hard. And obviously the board doesn't get paid either. So it's an honor. It's an honor. And I think that speaking for people like Ted and Matt Keys, I mean, yeah, it's fantastic to be able to be of service to this amazing event and sort of serve its mission, being of service to the trail running community. You mentioned how you're the sole employee, and I know this is a full-time job for you year round. Maybe you could just paint a quick picture as to what this next month looks like for you as we enter crunch time with race day approaching after Memorial Day. Well, there are a couple big milestones that happen along the way to the race day. One of them is getting the race program done, and that's in the middle of May. Publishing a magazine once a year. I'm not a magazine publisher. That is so hard. It is really, really painful. And the editing process of getting a magazine together. It's not like passing around a Word document and then accepting changes or rejecting changes. It's annotating a PDF and then submitting that to the designer who's already got it in InDesign. So correcting mistakes it's a cumbersome process. And that once that deadline passes, then it's training runs, and those have passed this last weekend. And then we have one more big milestone, and that is the aid station supply pickup. That's 2 weeks before the race. We put together all the non-perishable items, including the pop-ups and those kinds of things, but the non-perishable food items. And once that gets out, there's 28 stations. So the warehouse captains come and pick all the non-perishables up. Yeah. So we have all their aid station supplies, and each one is unique. Each aid station is slightly different than the other. Once that's out the door, it's probably harder to stop the race at that point than to let it go on. It's in autopilot at that point. It's happening. Everybody's moved. So we got a couple more weeks of that. And this year, because of the snow and the fire, we got quite a bit of trail work still to do here in this last month. The snow has prevented us from going any higher than dusty corners right now on trail work, as you probably saw when you were on this weekend. Yeah, we'll talk about the snowpack here in a second and the fire. Yeah. So we're going to have a lot of work going to be at the last minute. 2017 and 2019, similar types of snowpacks and trail work. And 2017 was the year I ran as a race director, and I was so exhausted from doing trail work right before the race that this year I'm not running, and I'll probably never do that again. But there'll be a lot of last minute stuff, and a core group of folks will be out there trying to shovel the snow, the last drifts of snow to Red Star Ridge or Lion Ridge. Yeah. Let's come back to that in a sec, but let's talk a bit about your experience running the event. You are a 9-time finisher in addition to being the race director now for 11 years. You mentioned your finish in 2017, which was your 9th finish.
And that was like a notoriously difficult year. I think, probably the hardest running conditions in the last decade. So particularly tough year to manage the event, but then also a tough year to run the race. Maybe if there's any anecdotes from the 2017 iteration of the race as you were chasing cutoffs and, finishing in golden hour while also, like you said, dealing with all the exhausting responsibilities as the race director all the way up until race morning.
So before I ran 2017, I obviously was preparing the organization for me to run. And Tim Tweetmeyer thought, "Oh, this is great, Craig. If you can get the race to run without you having to press any buttons or touch anything, getting a phone call, then the organization is in a better place than it was before." So yeah, that's a great idea. I agree with you. So we worked on all the delegation models, and on race day, I have my radio in my truck, and I would hear all the radio traffic. We have RD2s that sit at net control. There's always somebody at net control with the designation of RD2, and they make decisions on my behalf. I hear all these things, and it was oftentimes really hard not to jump on the radio and say what I wanted to say. I just have to let things resolve the way the RD2 wanted them to or thought. And sometimes it wasn't exactly what I would do, but I realized I have to let that happen if I'm going to run the race.
Yeah.
And so I did. And when we got to race day, it really was not hard for me to be off the grid running the race. What was hard was all the prep in the last 2 weeks, all the trail work. Yeah. I didn't even think about my race until 5 p.m. on Friday before the race. I haven't done this since 2011. How do I it's
totally different now. The footwear is totally different.
I didn't tape my feet. I didn't think about the drop bags it was not good. I would not advise a future race director to do what I did in 2017, not with the race at the level that it's at right now. But
so say a little bit more about the RD2s. And this goes back to what you said earlier about having a flat organization versus sort of a more vertical organization. So maybe you could shout out some of the people that you empower to sort of make those decisions.
My wife is one, John Katz is one, Bill Hambrick is one, and Sherry Alvarez is the fourth. That's who we got going right now. And we'll discuss scenarios, like what happens if a fire breaks out at this part of the course, and then we'll brainstorm, well, how would I resolve it? And really what I want them to do is think the way that I would think, because they're filling in for me. So I don't necessarily want to tell them exactly what to do, but I want them to think the way that I would think through a problem. And we do that every year. And I feel really good about, and we also practice at other races like Pine to Palm. We work together, and Canyons, we work together. So we get to practice at other races. And yeah, Joe Steinmetz is the ham radio lead, and he's also getting closer to an RD2 now.
Yeah.
But he doesn't necessarily, the radio folks don't necessarily want to make decisions. They just want to relay information. They want to communicate. They want someone there at net control to answer questions all the time. And some races don't have that, and it's pretty frustrating for Joe when he's at a race that doesn't have a direct line to the RD. Mm-hmm. And they have to make decisions right now. So we always have an RD2 who can answer to the communication folks, answer questions that they have right now. But it's a good model. I inherited that model from Greg.
Yeah.
So it was good.
Yeah. Well, I think it just speaks to what you said earlier of just the quality of people who are attracted to the race. And so not to say your job is easy, Craig, we all know it's not, but that you have a great team of competent people who you can trust in tough moments and who can be supportive of you as the leader of the organization. Let's talk more about this year? This has been a challenging year too. I bet you're happy you don't have to run the race this year. The Mosquito Fire, let's start with that. That happened back in the fall, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who'd love an update. So maybe just give the listeners a sense of the damage that occurred and the restoration effort, how it's tracking at this point.
Yeah, so it burned about 16 miles of the course, including a couple communities. Michigan Bluff was, pretty devastated, but not completely devastated. Fortunately, where our aid station is, as you saw this last weekend, somehow survived. But some homes completely untouched. They look green, and then right next door, there's nothing but the chimney. Right? It was pretty hard, because I know a lot of people there, a lot of friends. That was pretty hard. But with respect to the trail, burned 16 miles, some in the Forest Service. From Swinging Bridge, basically to the turnoff to Volcano Canyon. That was in the Forest Service. And then there's some county road. Bath Road is county stuff. And then top of Forest Hill, or the top of Cal Street and Forest Hill, that's private land. That burned really hot. Mm-hmm. And then there was another 4 miles or so on the state land. So a total of about 16 miles got burned. And in some ways, it was probably to our advantage that it was under 3 different land agencies owners. If it was all under one, it might have been too big of a lift to get. If it was all under Forest Service land, it might have been a huge lift for one entity to do it. But we had great relationships with the state and the feds, and we're dealing with the private landowner. But fortunately, we had been through this before in 2013 and in 2001. So 2013 was the American Fire. 2001 was a Star Fire. And we learned a lot from those years. We went to the Forest Service. Actually, they came to us first while the fire was still burning. And the district ranger said, you probably should think about, postponing the race or canceling the race. And we didn't really want to hear that at all. So, but I knew that.
A lot of chatter on the internet about that too.
There was a lot of chatter. Yeah, a lot of chatter. So our approach was, we're going to ask them what we can do to get this trail ready. Not ask them, when are they going to have the trail ready? And that's a very fundamental difference.
Wow.
If you just ask them, hey, when's the trail going to be ready for us to run? When you guys, they got a ton of other things to do. Mm-hmm. Your race may not be the highest priority. And Gorge Waterfall is one of those races that got shut out for 4 or 5 years, right? You got to have resources and resolve, and you got to make sure you have good relationships going into these. And we had a receptive partner in the Forest Service, and this drove all of the fire restoration. It was the Forest Service. They were very creative. We told them we would do whatever we needed to do. Right? And you were there when we passed the budget for the next year, and it was a shortfall of $94,000. And the board's like, "What? We're going to pass this budget, and we don't have $100,000. That we don't know where that $100,000 comes from." But we were committed to doing whatever we needed to. So the Forest Service was really creative. They kept hotshot crews around before they transferred to their next shift, and they felled hazard trees for us. We ended up paying money to the local Forest Service here to keep their seasonal employees on, so they could work throughout the winter and work on the trail. And then we hired this trail crew from Plumas County, Sierra Butte Trail Stewards. They are excellent. They've worked with the Forest Service here locally many times, so they were easy to plug in. We paid them directly, and that drove everything. As the state, which was also very receptive, but they kept asking, well, what's happening up above? What's happening in the Forest Service land? Because if the Forest Service if the trail in the Forest Service wasn't going to open up, I don't think the state would have been as likely to, okay, we'll do this and we'll let you do that. But
Sure. Yeah.
but the Forest Service was driving the whole darn thing. If they had said, no, we're not going to be able to get this done, the state probably would have just said, okay, well, we're not going to rush into this either. But they didn't. And then the private land, we took some opportunities in January to fell hazard trees on 2.25 miles of really burnt land, severely burnt land, like land that didn't have any oak leaves, no organic material for 2 miles, nothing on the ground.
Wow.
Forested land that was completely torched.
Yeah.
And that one's been a little bit harder because we don't have a partner there to go do trail work. We have to assume all the responsibility for that one. But it has gone amazingly well, and we got to show most of it, except for the top of the private land, the top of Cal Street. But we got to show it to everybody this weekend, and we were pretty proud of it. And in addition to the work by the professionals, we opened up a lot more volunteer days than we have in the last few years, and the community responded. Sometimes I was humbled by the responses when I'd reach out and say, hey, will you guys help? And suddenly I'd have 20 people like, yeah, I'll go right now in the rain. We worked probably 5 days in the rain.
Yeah.
Insane. We walked down in snow and we worked in the rain. So the volunteer effort has been humbling, and I think it really goes to how much this trail and this event means to so many people. It's pretty special, and it's humbling at times.
You do get that sense. You mentioned his name just a second ago, but maybe if you could introduce the audience to John Katz and any other important characters who don't get the kudos and the limelight that maybe they deserve, and putting this trail together and ensuring that, at least at this point, knock on wood, that race day will go off without a hitch.
Yeah, John Katz has been our trails guy for, I think, about 5 or 6 years now, 5 years. He represents both Tevis and the run to the Forest Service and to the state and the private landowners. He has worked so many hours. He told me his wife offered to pay him $40,000 to not do this job anymore.
Volunteer job. Yeah.
Like, no, I don't know. 40,000. It's not even on my radar. That's too low. But yeah, it's been all consuming for him. He had a career in geology. So he's retired, and he does this because he loves it. But this is definitely a hard year for him, and we would not be here without him. He's got really good relationship skills, and he just follows through on everything that he says to the Forest Service and to the state and to whoever. Just an incredible man. Integrity is top notch, and I think he's having fun. I think so. He's got a bunch of other big projects. We got the Granite Chief Reroute project. It's a $1.5 million project. That's kind of in the background while all this fire stuff's going on. We have the Pucker Point extension that's going on. We got the switchbacks above Duncan Canyon Aid Station that we're trying to resolve with the Forest Service. So he's got all these big projects that for a normal year, those would be really huge lifts. And then to throw this fire stuff on it, there's no way I would be able to do this. I would have been able to do without him.
Any lessons in leadership through this fire experience? Because this has probably been one of the harder things that you've had to deal with. And at least for me as a board member and an observer, you've never once betrayed any insecurity about whether the race was going to happen. You're fielding probably 1 million emails from nervous runners wondering if it's going to get canceled. There's chatter on the internet that there's no way Western States is going to come together. Any lessons in leading an organization through that type of a problem?
Wow. I was definitely committed. And so was John Katz. We were both committed to seeing this through. And it's very similar to running a 100-miler. I got asked several times this weekend, well, what advice do you have to give to this person? set your mind on, I'm going 100 miles. I'm going to Auburn. And none of these other things that could take you out, they never come up, right? Like, oh, you could stop at Michigan Bluff, get in a car, and you'd be eating a hamburger or in a milkshake at Warden's. So John and I both had that. We are going there. Maybe it was naive in some ways, but I never doubted that we'd have the event this year. And John didn't doubt it. And he definitely fed off of me, and I fed off of him. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Just to see how every agency and the board and all the constituents, the runners, how everybody just coalesced behind this. Like, we're going there. This is what we're going to do. We're working towards this same goal. It was pretty awesome. I love being in this position. There's no doubt. I want to be here, even though it's hard at times. I want to be right where I am right now. Incredible. So I guess the lesson would be, if you find yourself in this position and you say, boy, I sure wish somebody else was there. I sure wish Craig was still there.
I didn't have to make this decision. Yeah.
Then you're probably not in the right spot, right?
Yeah.
And I learned that from a ski patrol or a ski area manager 15 years ago. It's like, if you are in a stressful situation in leadership and you wish you weren't there, then you're not a leader. You shouldn't be there. You're not that person.
Wow.
It's pretty powerful. You may not like what you see. You're like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that too, Craig. You mentioned your blog earlier in the conversation, and that's how I was introduced to who you were way back in probably 2008, 2009. And I knew that you were a ski patroller. And I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to how, because I know a lot of ski patrollers. I have a bunch of buddies who are ski patrollers, and they're all just top-notch human beings who I would trust with my life, right? And so I think there's a special culture and sort of camaraderie in the groups of ski patrollers. But I wonder if also, if there's anything you want to say about that, but also maybe how it's prepared you for, assuming the role as race director, Western States.
I'm absolutely convinced that my years as ski patroller is what prepared me for this job and why I got the job. It wasn't because of the number of pop-ups that I'd put up in aid stations, because I directed 10 Waldos. That's it. Yeah. When I applied for the job, many race directors put on 10 races a year, and I had done it my whole career. But I learned, in addition to the emergency response and learning how to deal in crises situations, which every ski patroller has to do. Yep. I was involved in leadership, so I got to work on several boards and interface with lots of volunteers and paid patrollers. So I learned how boards operate. I learned how to work to affect change in organizations that have been around for a while and somewhat entrenched. It's not just, you can't just come in with a hammer and we're going to go this way, right? It takes a while to move a big ship in another direction. So, and I had incredible teachers and mentors over the years through my ski patrol that taught me so much. I would not be in this position without my years as a ski patroller.
So cool. So speaking of ski patrolling, they may be hard at work at Palisades Tahoe. It's ski patrolling up until race day, it sounds like. So this is my elegant transition to talking about the snowpack, which I'm sure a lot of people are interested to hear the race director's take on. I looked at the stats right before we started recording, and it seems like there's 51 inches of snow at the Palisades Tahoe Snowtel. That's 27 inches of snow water equivalent. So how are you anticipating snow potentially impacting the race this year through the high country?
Well, it looks very similar to 2019. This cooler weather that we're having right now is not favorable for the melt. It may change the melt rate, but getting ready for the training runs, we went into dusty corners on Thursday and Friday before the race. We got a special pass to go through the closure on Mosquito Ridge Road, which is Very dangerous, by the way. It's very scary. You don't want to drive on Mosquito Ridge Road. It is really, really scary. And the snow drifts were almost identical, and the way we cut through them with shovels was almost identical to 2019. So I suspect, and the snow up at Robinson Flat with the toilet, I'll keep posting pictures of the snow in the toilet at Robinson Flat, because everybody's seen that toilet, and you'll be amazed at how much it melts here. And you can go look in 2019. I tweeted the same series of photos. You can see how much snow there was. It was almost the same amount.
Most photographed toilet in Northern California. That's for
probably. Sure. The early on, when the snow was piling up, there were comparisons to 1983 over and over and over and over. 83 was a really big snow year for Western states. That was in the Desperate Dreams documentary when Jim Howard passed Jim King on the track, right? And probably the closest race. I think it's the closest race in history.
Yeah.
But we never got that amount of snow. It never looked that big right over our course. Southern California, Mammoth, yeah, they got massive, massive snow. But the farther north you go, the northern snow-tell sites, they're not as close to 83 as the southern. So we're kind of in that middle part. And now it's not, I mean, May melted so much. In 83 and 95, we increased our snow water content from April 1 to May 1. And we dropped, I think it was 12 inches we dropped of snow water content. So it was, while the snow totals, like the amount of inches that fall, that ski areas love to advertise, because, wow, we got 700 and something inches of snow. That really isn't that important to us. It's the snow water content and the pack, how dense that pack is. And I think we're going to be looking at the last week before the race. We're going to be up there trying to bust into Red Star and Lion Ridge. We have a little bit more complication at Lion Ridge, because the Cedars, which we drive through, that's a private community in the middle of forest near Soda Springs. That's not supposed to be scheduled to be plowed until June 23rd. And we have to go through the Cedars. So that one could be a little bit harder. Normally that has been plowed early enough that we can drive up there, and then we cut the trees off the snow. If you don't cut the trees off the snow, the snow won't melt under the trees. You'll have big berms. So you have to cut the snow. You may think, oh, they'll absorb the heat from the sun and it'll melt. No. It doesn't go into the pack. The heat doesn't go into the pack. It goes into the tree. So you have to get in there and cut the trees off as soon as you can, so that it'll melt the rest of the snow. So,
interesting. See, this is the stuff that nobody would ever know unless they.
And LeGrand Scott, who I mentioned earlier at Red Star, he's the one who told me that in 2017 we didn't do that. And he said, Craig, you're going to have these big old mounds of snow. I'm like, man, I live in Oregon, but we never had that kind of snow. We never had that kind of heat and sun that we get down here. So the way it melts here is very different. And he was absolutely right. We left trees on Red Star, and there were these huge 4-foot, berms of snow where every tree was, and it was melted off between them. So we'll get up there as soon as we can, try to cut the trees out, and then we'll be probably cutting the last drifts of snow. It usually melts or doesn't melt in the same spots every year where the sun doesn't get it, or somehow it drifts in there. And we know where those are. So we'll be trying to bust through. But we're going to be on the normal course for sure. People wait so many years now to run the course. They don't want to run on a gravel road next to a reservoir. We want to be on the ridge tops, and that's what we're going to deliver. The views from the ridges are going to be outstanding this year. Yeah. It's going to be so good.
Well, I've said it in multiple places, including in our board conversations, but I think it's setting up to be a very special year. If we've got some snow on the course, the 50th running, recovering from the devastation of the Mosquito Fire, with some of the most incredible athletes in the world assembling at Western States, it's going to be one for the ages. And I can't wait to be a part of it myself. Let's talk a little bit about the Golden Ticket races, because this was an announcement that Western States made last week. I think this is the earliest the golden ticket docket has been announced in Western States history. So maybe if you want to just run through the docket for the listeners, and then maybe we could talk about some of the considerations we took to arrive at the list.
Yeah. So you were involved every step of the way. So maybe I've
got the list up in front of me. If that's easier, I'm
almost there.
Oh.
Yeah. So you want to go through the list first and then talk about each one, or
we don't need to talk. We don't need to go maybe in too much depth, but maybe you can go through the list and we could talk.
So CCC is the first one in France in September. That's 100K, and Grindstone 100K, which is now a by UTMB race. That's in Virginia. The 100K will be the first time it's run. It's been, I don't know how many years it's been around, but it's been around. I ran it in 2011 and it wasn't a brand new race. So, And then Nice Côte d'Azur in France in September. Javelina 100, which has been a golden ticket race for a couple of years now. It's Halloween weekend, October 28th. The Doi Inthanon, Thailand by UTMB 100 miler, which was a golden ticket race this last year. Black Canyon is going to be a golden ticket race again, except the other races will have top 2 men and top 2 women. And this one will be a super golden ticket race, and there'll be the top 3 men and top 3 women at Black Canyon will get tickets. And then the Canyons again, 100K at the end of April. So 7 races. It's an interesting mix of international and domestic. Only 200 milers, but it's more 100 milers than we used to have. I'm excited about it, and as you know, it took us a while to agree to all this. And I've seen some chatter since we announced it, and like, who makes the decision on golden ticket races? And it's us. It needs to be a HOKA race, so HOKA has some influence. And our contract with UTMB, they have some say, and Ironman obviously is part of UTMB. So all 4 of those entities have input on the selection of races, but we don't just make the decision by ourselves and not have input from anybody else.
Yeah.
And
but at the end of the day, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. And I think one of the things that everybody admires about your leadership is that there's always transparency attached to these big decisions. And I think it is good to just talk openly about the various stakeholders. But at the end of the day, it was really, a small group of us who put our heads together on it, solicited feedback in a collaborative way with the partners of Western States. And I don't think there was ever a point where we felt pressured. I know there was at least some chatter out there that this is an indication that, of course, Ironman and UTMB are coming to take over Western States, which couldn't be further from the truth. But I think we've arrived at a really cool event. So, yeah.
And we want the most competitive events, right? That's what these races are about. We're not solely driven by geographic distribution. We want to have races that are going to be the most competitive. Well, the by UTMB races are likely to be the most competitive races in the next few years. And that's a fact, right? How are we going to deny that? Why would we stay away from those races just because we I don't know, whatever your reasons are for wanting to stay away?
Yeah. And I think obviously there's some people who would be disappointed. For example, Bandera is not on the list after being a golden ticket race for many years. Tarawera is no longer a golden ticket race, and they are one of the part of the UTMB World Series. But, things evolve, things change. And I think there's a good rationale for everything. Obviously, one of the things that Western States, I think, has been criticized for, and the sport has been criticized for, is sort of a West Coast geographical bias. And so incorporating Grindstone, given the Beast Coast an opportunity to show up on their home trails and compete for these amazing golden tickets is I think a great opportunity for that community. I talked to Clark Zeeland, the race director, myself, about whether it should be the 100-miler or the 100K, and we decided to go with the 100K here for the first time at Grindstone. I think CCC creates a really interesting new dynamic in the golden ticket conversation. Hardcore fans will know that UTMB has been a golden ticket race for the last couple of years, and we talked internally about how, sometimes it feels like that golden ticket conversation gets lost amid the hoopla of UTMB week. But racing on that stage, it is, some of the most densely talented competitive fields in the world every season. And so CCC, we thought, would be a fun new addition, removing UTMB. And then the 3-bagger at Black Canyons, I think, is also a fun new innovation, a fun new development for the golden ticket docket here. And that race obviously is just such a top quality event that's drawn fabulous competition. They have great media live stream around it, so it creates fantastic conversation about it, which is value additive to Western states, and keeping that conversation sort of top of mind for trail runners in the early spring season. So I think a lot to be excited for this docket. But I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Craig, but I think also, this is an evolving thing and nothing's set in stone forever. And I think it's fun to have, at least from my perspective, like some continuity, some consistency, and then also some newness to it.
Yeah. And I want to make sure people know, or let people know, that we don't have any contracts with any of these races. They're not paying us a fee. We're not there's no financial arrangement between these races. And most of the races absolutely love being golden ticket races because it enhances their competition and their exposure. And you look at Jamil's races, my God, what Black Canyon has exploded. When I was there this year, I talked to his mom, and his mom said, when they started this race, their goal was to get enough runners so there'd be a Western States qualifier, just a qualifier. And now it's
one of the biggest races in the country.
Absolutely. And it's really cool to watch that. And he just texted me, Jamil just texted me before this call, and he's going to do more than he's done in the past. And I'll share it with you in a bit. But he's just really excited about this. And the East Coast in Texas, as AJW pointed out, now the East Coast loves me again, but Texans hate me. It's like, it wasn't me personally that made the decisions, but it was all of us. I went to Bandera again this year, and it was a great race. There was nothing wrong with this. Isn't an indictment against it. It was definitely in the running until really late, and we went with Grindstone, and we hear the complaints. We hear the East Coasters saying, "Why don't you love us?" But if 3 West Coasters or Colorado or Utah folks go and win those golden tickets at Grindstone, okay, hey guys, you East Coasters,
you better show up.
You better show up. Exactly, show up. It was really fun having you in the mix this year too, because you just know the fields and you know the races better than any of us. So it was really fun to have you put on all of them.
It was an honor for me. And I think there's always going to be conversation and feedback, both positive and negative. And I think one of the great things about you and about Western States in general is being open to feedback and being able to, like I said earlier, transparency has always been sort of the core value in the Craig Thornley principles of race directing, I feel like. And so being willing to sort of stand behind decisions, explain the rationale behind it, but also honestly listen to feedback and see where we can do better in the future. But this is the docket for 2024. And I think there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah. And one more word on the internationals. So the primary reason we have more international races now is we lost UTWT. UTWT, the Ultra Trail World Tour, we used to get 6 international athletes. When that went away, we had no avenue for overseas athletes to come into the race. So we made the shift to, instead of all domestic golden ticket races, hey, we'll put races around the world. So that's where that change came from. It isn't because of UTMB, but the World Series obviously evolved from Ultra Trail World Tour. So we were already connected in there, and it wasn't hard for us to listen to them on the races that they suggest that we should include. And so yeah, I want people to know that. That's why those international races started.
Absolutely. I think the European continent deserves 2 golden ticket races, just given the density of competition and the seriousness with which the athletes compete over there. It's absolutely a spectacle. And obviously, I think Thailand provided some really great new characters that are going to be coming to Western States this year. That have increased sort of like the Asian professional athlete representation in the Western States field, really for the first time that I can remember. And so, yeah, it's a new era, a new day. And yeah, this will be a constantly ever evolving thing. Maybe every year we'll have to record one of these podcasts and go through the new docket. Craig, we'll start kind of winding down now, but I wanted to just tick off a couple more things before we get to my closing philosophical questions. One thing that struck me in sort of our conversations in the board is to the extent to which you think about sort of the key man risk that you present to the race and sort of ensuring that the race will be in good hands if, God forbid, something terrible happened to you. So I'd love for you to just maybe talk a little bit about how you think about that, about how you, because I think it's potentially counterintuitive, when you are the race director and you are the important guy, you sort of want to feel like, oh, this thing couldn't go off without me. But you've sort of intentionally orchestrated things so that, God forbid something happened to you, the race wouldn't be left in the lurch. Can you talk about that?
Like I said already, I definitely want to be in this seat. I'm not trying to step away or plan for my exit. But I was preparing for PTL last year, and I was doing some stuff in the mountains. I joined one Zoom call with you at 12,000 feet on Mount Shasta, right? But I'd gotten on in some sketchy places, and Diana, the president, she was so worried that something was going to happen to me before the race. And it definitely could have. It absolutely can anytime. And I don't want the race to suffer at all if something were to happen to me. But when you're the sole employee, it definitely is exposure. The organization, the race is exposed to some potential risk. Bringing in Carrie, the new administrative assistant, I think is really going to help, because there were a lot of details in my head that only I know about. And I don't like that. And I don't want that to be the case. There's a lot of really smart people that I've delegated out to, and they can do their jobs, but there still needs to be someone who has all of the details of the race in their head. And those key people don't have the whole thing in their head, and none of the board members have the whole thing in their head either. So we're trying to bring Carrie up to speed, and already she probably has more than most of the other people that have been working around the race for a lot of years. But yeah, it's very similar to what we do on race day with the RD2s. Right? They make decisions on my behalf. I'm still the leader. I get to take the blame if something goes bad, or I get to take the credit when things go right. But yeah, I don't want the race to be exposed.
No, that's great. So speaking of RD2s, I'd love for you to maybe just say a couple more words about Lori, your wife, who's one of those RD2s. She was out at training camp this weekend, and I know you get the disproportionate amount of recognition, but that she plays a big role in the Western States community and in the race itself. So maybe give her some shine before we get to our final questions here.
She has been doing a lot since we started doing Waldo together. So we've been, she doesn't want to be the one making decisions. She's told me that time and time again. She would not want to be the one in charge, but she is, she wants to be the person who helps somebody else, happens to be me, help somebody else. I don't even know if I could articulate everything that she does for the race. On race weekend, RD2 is just one of the things that she does. Pre-race, we're up at Olympic Valley when we have those get-togethers with the sponsors, and she's done all of that. She does all the room allocations, all the boardroom allocations. That is tedious work, she runs on training runs. She did 2 aid stations, one on Saturday and one on Monday. She does volunteer shirts every year. She's really proud of the volunteer shirts. I can't tell her what's going to be on the volunteer shirts. She gets to tell me, or she does tell me. But we work together at other races too. We work at Pine to Palm. We work at Waldo, and she's a radio operator. She can run net control. She could do it all by herself without me, but she wouldn't want to be the one that got blamed for a decision that didn't go right. But she's very capable. She could do this job, but she just doesn't want to. She wants to be in the background.
Thanks for sharing that. So final closing philosophical questions for you here, Craig. No pressure. These can just be quick hitters. The first one is, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sport, can be living or dead. And why is it that you admire that person? Yeah.
So you shared these questions with me like 20 minutes before or 40 minutes before. I think I look back at all the people who mentored me or helped me over the years that got me to this point. And I think a lot about them, and I kind of get emotional when I think about it, because people really spent a lot of time on me. And I'm not exactly sure why, but they did. And I'm forever grateful for those people who did. But if I were to look at one person right now, I think Tony Rossman, who was on our board, and he's now on our advisory council. He had a stroke. He's a land use attorney, was responsible for helping us get forever permission to go through Granite Chief. And I really wish he was here right now with this Ryan property. I really missed him. You never got to see him as a board member when he still had all his faculties. But what was so awesome about Tony is we'd have these contentious discussions, and people would get into their corners. And you've seen this already. I'm in plenty of board meetings or committees, and people would just get entrenched, right? And Tony would always come at the end of the discussions. He'd find the middle ground. He was a master at that. And we could really use him now, especially right now with the private land stuff. But I just admired that. I admired that about him, that he was always, no matter where his position was, he could look at the other position, and he totally respected the dissenting view, and he'd bring us to the middle ground. And so many times I wish I would do that. I tend to stay in my corner a little more. And I need to be more like Tony more often.
That's so beautiful, Craig. And I'm just pulling up on my computer. There's something that I want to incorporate either in the pre-race show or in the broadcast itself. And that is Tony Rossman's op-ed that he wrote to the LA Times in, I think it was 1986, just after the 1986 Western States 100. It is goosebumps written material. And I want to read the entirety of it, maybe at the pre-race interview show before race weekend, or maybe on the broadcast itself. I won't bore our listeners by reading the whole thing here, but man, is it a perfect articulation of what makes the race so special.
Yeah.
Final question for you here, Craig. What is one truth that you've learned about yourself or about life in general through your participation in sport?
Wow. Well, again, you gave me 40 minutes to think about this one. One thing I have pulled from my running 100 milers is I know I'm not going to quit on things. I know that no matter how bad things can get or how low they can get, I know I can last. And I use that a lot. I rely on that a lot. Like, oh, I run 100 milers, or I used to run 100 milers. I know I can do this. And I pull on that all the time. Like, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to make it. I can outlast if it's a relationship with a land agency or somebody else. Like, you're not going to wear me down. You're not going to wear me down. So.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Well, Craig, yeah, what a great place to end. You're a good man. You're a great leader. We're lucky to have you as the race director of Western States. I hope you get some rest in the next 4 weeks before we see each other again in Olympic Valley. And yeah, you say you're not a 100-mile runner anymore, but you have 9 finishes at the Western States 100, which means eventually you're going to need to get that 1,000-mile buckle. So
yeah, I will. And thank you, Dylan. And I've really enjoyed you on the board. It's been awesome having an elite runner on the board and the perspective that you bring. It's really fun for me to have you on the board.
Well, it's an honor for me too, Craig. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
All right. See you, Dylan.